My day job used to be at the University of Houston. So I was a faculty member there for about 12 years in the Department of Educational Psychology, and my research area is kids with behavioral problems. So we work with a lot of the larger school districts around the country around behavior, improving behavior for students. One of the things that I often will say is that we have a pretty good idea of what works for kids with behavioral problems. You know, our biggest challenge is getting what works implemented consistently in the schools. So really the biggest challenge around behavior that we see is helping to improve implementation processes. And one of the first districts that we worked with was in our backyard, which was Houston ISD. So Houston ISD was the first district we worked with when I was at the university. And we worked with their students with severe emotional and behavioral disabilities. And the second district we started working with was Dallas ISD. And that's where Andre and I met. So Andre, why don't you introduce a little bit about your background?
Sure. Can you guys hear me first of all? Good. My name is Andre Banks again, and I am the Director of Implementation for the company. I've been here probably about 4.5 to 5 years. But prior to that, as Stuart said, I worked in Dallas ISD as an ED teacher, and my certification says that Andre Banks Certified Emotionally Disturbed for life. So,
and it's true.
Yeah, and I'll bring that for you. So I started out there. Then I left there, became a behavior specialist for a few years. In the last 9 or 10 years in the district, I worked as the program coordinator for the EBD program. All right?
And Andre in his district was the second to implement, and we implemented with them around a lot of different issues. Actually, one of the things that we did when we got started was Andre and I actually did a lot of research together. We spent probably a couple of years researching the software, the outcomes we were getting with the process. And then we spent 2 years really kind of researching the implementation process. You know, one of the things I'll say a lot of times is that educators are very eager to take on initiatives that improve outcomes for kids. But sometimes you have multiple initiatives competing for time, and it's tough to get those initiatives going and sustained. So we spent a couple of years really trying to figure out how could we partner with the districts to help sustain the implementations. So we spent a couple of years doing that as well. And before we launch into the presentation, which is going to talk a little bit about some of the experiences we had in Dallas and other districts, can you tell me a little bit about why you chose to come here today? Not Hilton Head, I know that. But why come to this session? What are you hoping to walk away from today with? This is the audience participation part. So what do you think? Yes, ma'am.
I'm on a mission from my behavior program in my ISD to find something that's a little bit extend something like SWIFT.
Yeah. Okay. And which district are you with?
I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, we've worked. I know met some of the folks at Kalamazoo at the Urban Collaborative for Special Education Leadership. That's just where we were at Charlotte earlier this week. So, what other sorts of things were you guys hoping to come today, walk away from today with? What type of data we collect? Okay. How have you guys? What has your experience been collecting data in the schools around behavior? I know it's too early on a Saturday to be asking this. Pardon me?
It varies.
Okay.
We collect different kinds of data, and then they don't know what to do with it.
Right, and that is actually, I think, one of the biggest challenges around behavioral data is that there's a lot of kind of consistency and agreement around what type of data we're going to collect for academics, but for behavioral data, it varies all over the place. Every district does behavior differently, and often within districts, there's different models. And one of the things that we know is that different types of data are better when you're trying to evaluate outcomes at different tiers of services. So, you know, at tier one of the types of data we often will look at, aside from our screening data, our office referrals, placements, suspensions, things like that. But then when we move into tier 2 and 3, if we're implementing a multi-tiered system or in a special ed, the type of data that tends to be most effective is looking at some sort of behavioral report card. But then it's kind of the challenge of getting that process implemented and getting the information back in a usable format. And then on top of that, helping people understand how to interpret it. So I think that's some of the things that we see as well. Okay. I'm good. When we start these presentations, sometimes one of the things that we like to do is kind of throw out a few statements about why we think behavior matters. And typically, folks in special education, student services, they understand why addressing behavior is important in schools. Sometimes folks on the other side of the house may not have as clear understanding of why addressing behavior is important. So we really talk about 3 reasons as to why addressing behavior is important from our perspective. And these are really research-based findings that you see in the literature pretty consistently. And one is that we know problem behavior disrupts the school climate, right? The research is pretty clear. High-performing schools have fewer behavioral incidents than lower-performing schools. We also know that problem behaviors and academic performance are interrelated. So we know that students who exhibit the early onset of behavioral problems are 3 times more likely to fail, drop out, have other types of issues than other students. And the last point that I like to make is that disruptive behavior is almost always identified in exit surveys as one of the primary reasons why teachers leave the teaching profession. We know that behavior is important to address for a variety of reasons, but does this make sense to you guys? I mean, does it resonate with what you see? Anything else that you would add to that list or change? When we do presentations to superintendents and school boards, we find addressing this is always really important. So we can kind of set the stage with why putting behavioral initiatives are important to begin with, but then why we need the data to really kind of evaluate the outcomes. The next question I like to ask is, what are the types of behavioral problems you guys see teachers struggling with in the schools? So tell me a little bit about what types of behavioral problems do you guys see your teachers struggling with?
Mouthy kids.
Okay, mouthy kids, so kids that talk back, right, that are disrespectful. What other sorts of things?
Non-compliant.
Okay, right, non-compliance, defiant kids, refusal. Social problems, right? Kids who have a difficult time interacting with other kids. You have some of your broader-based disruptive behavior, your inattention and disorganization, your hyperactivity, impulsivity. Academic problems, and what I mean by this is I refer to this as like problems of academic productivity. You know what I mean? Like starting assignments late, not turning in assignments, not completing assignments, those types of issues. When you look at the research, there really are those 6 categories that tend to show up consistently around the types of behavioral problems teachers struggle with, and they represent across the areas that we were just discussing. One of the things that we like to do in our system is teachers go through this process of identifying what the problem behavior is, and then we help them identify what the pro-social behavior is. We're trying to teach them and give them strategies and ideas of what they can do for them. But we also collect a lot of data about what types of behaviors teachers struggle with most often. So what do you think of this list that's up here? Which of the behavior categories do you think is at top one?
Academic.
Okay, academic, social. And let me tell you, the interesting thing about this is that teachers are working on all these behaviors, and they all frequently occur. One of the things that we find, and this was data on about 3,300 kids, right? So it's a lot of data on a lot of kids, and this is kind of consistent across the years. Now, the defiant is the one that we see most consistently identified. Aggression was the one that we see least often identified, which was actually kind of surprising to me. I thought aggression might be a little higher. But these are students in the ED group. And so a lot of times I think what happens is that, so these are like from behaviors from a behavioral intervention plan, right? So if a kid's aggressive, there's a code of conduct that tends to go into place, right? And they get sent to a different place. What we wanted to do next was then look at which types of specific behaviors from these different categories were teachers working on. And this is actually where the academics showed up. So the number one was argues with adults. 25% of the plans of the 3,300 had argues with adults in it. Doesn't comply with rules, has emotional outbursts, doesn't complete assignments, and doesn't complete assignments accurately. So those were the 5 behaviors that the teachers talk about a lot that were identified on the behavioral intervention plans.